Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to my call, Beatles You Bender with Helen Lingard. And today I'm absolutely thrilled to have one of my favorite authors. I can't tell you how excited I am. I love this woman so much. Pam Grout. Thank you, Pam, for being here. Thank you and welcome for coming on.
Oh, well, thank you for having me on. It's so great to talk to another Kiwi, another Kiwi Englander, or Brit, I guess I should say. Yeah.
Yes, before we started, Pam and I were just chatting away, and it turns out that her daughter's dad is from New Zealand. And of course, I'm a Brit Kiwi. So we had a few things to talk about, and I'll get you to share that incredible story at the end of the call. That is just incredible.
Yeah.
So tell me, Pam, I love that. Is that a train in the background?
It is a train. Sometimes it can be annoying. It always amazes me that here we are, how many miles, thousands of miles apart, and this train, which is in my neighborhood, I don't know, 10 blocks away, people can hear it. So here you are in Wales hearing my train in Kansas. So it's kind of funny.
Isn't that incredible? I love that. I love the sound of a train. It's just such a, I guess it's a, I don't know what it is, but it's a historical sound, but it's just beautiful. It's beautiful.
Yeah, no, I love to hear the trains too, especially after having lived here all these years. And for me, it's a very comforting sound. Some people, don't want to hear it, but I like it. So anyway.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. So my first question, Pam, is my introduction to you was E Squared, which I just loved. I read the book and now I listen to it all the time. And I just love hearing your voice on your books. It's just so wonderful. But you started off with your website, George Clooney Slept Here. So how did you go from George Clooney Slept Here, and I'd love to know how you got George Clooney into the title somewhere, to E Squared?
Well, it's funny. I actually wrote E Squared long before I did George Clooney Slept Here. And I'll tell you, first of all, where that came from. In the United States, there's this famous saying in the travel business. They used to say, oh, George Washington slept here. Like every inn on the East Coast would put up a sign, George Washington slept here. So it was like this historic reason you'd want to go there. And so I was trying to come up with a name for my luxury website. It was Luxury Travel. And so I thought, well, that's such a common thing. George Washington slept here. I'm going to make it George Clooney slept here. So it's basically just a play on words. But I was a travel writer long before I came up with George Clooney slept here. Back in the day before the internet, I wrote for, and still do write for magazines, actual paper magazines. And then so George Clooney Slept Here came up after kind of the internet came in and everybody started moving everything online. So that's when I started doing the George Clooney Slept Here, or about that same time. And it's not my most active of my travel writing places, but it's a place, that I can publish pieces after I've been somewhere. So, yeah.
And do you not find you get a lot of attention with the name George Clooney? Because he always gets attention.
Well, you know what's funny? One time I got an email from his English teacher, and she said, oh, I just wanted to tell you I was George's English teacher. I mean, he has nothing to do with the website whatsoever. Doubt if he even knows about it. It really is just a funny play on words. And it's funny that maybe, had you never heard that saying, George Washington slept here? Probably not. So I could see where, yeah, some people wouldn't, and a lot of the readers, of course, are from other countries, so they probably don't even, get the joke or whatever with that. But I do occasionally hear, like sometimes I'll hear from somebody that went to school with him. And sometimes people will say, hey, can you tell George blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, well, I'd love to be able to tell George that, but sadly, I do not know him. I just use it as a, kind of a funny way to do a luxury travel site.
I'm surprised it hasn't got to him and he hasn't contacted you, actually.
Oh, well, I'm sure, I can imagine there's probably hundreds of people that have used his name, maybe not in their website, but you know what I mean? When you're a celebrity of that magnitude, I can't even imagine all the stuff you must find about yourself on the internet.
Absolutely, yes, yeah. Yes. So tell me, with the, we were saying before that you weren't aware about the law of attraction. You didn't call it that. But E Squared, and what got you into those experiments? What took you in that direction?
Well, interestingly enough, I wrote the book 10 years before it became E Squared. And it first came out as a book called God Doesn't Have Bad Hair Days. And it was 10 spiritual experiments that I thought were really important for people to use. But it didn't do anything. I mean, a few people read it. The 5 people that read it, they loved it. But, that was about all that read it. So I put it aside. I wrote 3 books for National Geographic. And I came back, I thought, I really liked that book a lot. I think it was a fun book. maybe the timing wasn't right. Maybe the, who knows, for whatever reason, it went out of print. So I thought, well, it's out of print, meaning I had the rights back to it. So I decided to send it off to Hay House, and I changed the title. I dropped 2 of the experiments. Even the first book had 10 experiments, and then the second book had 9 experiments, but I changed 1 of the experiments. But because I always loved it, but as I was telling you earlier, it came out the first time under As God Doesn't Have Bad Hair Days, about the same time as the book The Secret. And in fact, my editor said, Pam, I don't understand it. Your book's just like The Secret. How come that's doing so well? Because, obviously mine wasn't. And I don't know what the title, I really don't know. One of the things I talk about in eCube, as we were talking about earlier, is that I always say that I kind of got on a higher frequency in between the writing of that and when I got, it came out as E squared. So at that point, the book just took off like gangbusters. So it's kind of fun. And in fact, I love to tell the story on New Year's Eve before E squared came out. It came out January 23rd. And on New Year's Eve, I was visiting my sister who lives on a beach in Georgia, or near a beach in Georgia. And so I took a stick and wrote in the sand, E squared will be an international bestseller, in big giant letters on the beach. And then then the waves came in and took it out into the ocean. And again, it's that thing of, well, I'll just let the universe handle it. And next thing I know, it's on the New York Times bestseller list and translated into some 40 languages. So anyway, it's kind of, I think, works out better when you let the universe handle the details instead of me trying to handle all the details.
Absolutely. That's incredible. That's incredible.
Yeah.
Well, oh yes. One of the stories you've got in, I think it's E squared, is about that drawing pin, which just blows me away.
The what?
The drawing, I don't want, the cover of the wood you call it. You had a calendar on your wall and you lost the little pin.
Oh, right. Yeah.
That's just blows my mind.
It does, yeah. Well, see, that's the thing. The way we perceive the universe, the field of infinite potentiality, God, whatever you want to call it, is so limited. I mean, what is possible? I mean, that was to me the perfect example of what could be possible. I mean, it's like, what if you just waited till it showed up in your hands, whatever it is you might want. And that was a really remarkable story. And I also thought it was pretty interesting because maybe my consciousness would allow me to have a thumbtack in my hand, but would it have allowed me to have a, Mercedes in my hand? You know what I'm saying? It's like how much we can get our consciousness around what is possible, but somehow or another, my consciousness was open enough that I could accept that. And so I wake up after a full night of sleeping after having looked for it. And there it is right there between these 2 fingers. So pretty amazing.
What did you do when you woke up and saw that? I mean, did you go screw around the house, or I'd have just been absolutely blown away?
Yeah, I think it took me a while to even, oh, wow. Because, you kind of wake up and you're thinking, oh, yeah, I was just looking for this. When I last was here with consciousness, I was looking for this thing, and here it is. So
I found that just incredible. So your book, E squared, it's definitely got a science feel to it, but it's not, because for me, science bores me. And yet your book is written and like I say, you narrate it. So it's done in such a way that it's very interesting and educational and funny. Do you have a science background?
I do not have a science background, but as a writer, you learn how to research just about anything. I'm a journalist by training. So as a journalist, you learn to research things. And the book, even though I set it up like science experiments, I wouldn't call it really hard science. But what I do, I present these hypotheses and I say to people, don't take my word for it. Here's my hypotheses that there really is this invisible energy force that wants to bless you. That's my hypotheses. Don't say, oh, that must be right. She said that. Like for years, we've had preachers and various people telling us this, but until you see it with your own 2 eyes, are you really going to believe it? So I said, here's the hypotheses. Let's give it a try. So I set it up with how they do scientific experiments, with the hypotheses. You make it a yes or no, it can happen or not. And then, so I set it up with a lab report sheet, but I set it up exactly like the scientific method. So anyway, it was just a way to get better proof than just taking anybody's word for it. Instead of it being a theory, let's turn it into real-time experience.
Yes, yes, yes. Now, you mentioned in one of your books, and I forget which one it was, I think it might have been, because I've been listening to both of them lately, and you mentioned about Kevin Costner.
Oh yeah, that's in the new one, yeah.
Thank and Grow Rich, yes.
Yeah.
Now, do you, how do you find out that sort of thing from about Kevin Costner?
Oh, how do I find out that kind of thing? That is a story that I heard on a podcast where he was being interviewed. So yeah, I tend to be an avid listener of all sorts of different things. I'm an avid reader, and I get a lot of information, you know, through books, through, well, all kinds of different things. I like to, you know, keep up on various things. And when I hear something that sort of relates to what I'm interested in, then I will jot it down and try to find out maybe a little bit more about it. So yeah.
Right, right. And what got you into writing in the first place?
Oh, I'm one of those kids that always loved to read. When I was in second grade, I got some award for reading 267 books. And it was, you know, like little picture books, like, you know, A is for apple, B, you know, it was like that. But I love to read. And I do think that anybody that really loves to read, they eventually think, you know, I bet I could write too. And that's exactly what happened to me. In second grade, I used to write these little, like Patty the Penguin and Blackie the Bear, and I'd illustrate them in my little, you know, second grade scrawls, and I'd write the words. And so I've always just loved to write. And then at university, I studied journalism and used to write for newspapers. So it's just always been what I love to do. And I feel so blessed. I mean, one of the definitions that I use for true wealth, you know, in the new book, Think and Grow Rich, is true wealth is having the ease and freedom, having the freedom particularly to do what you most love, and the freedom to be generous. And so to me, I've been very lucky in that I allowed myself that freedom to pursue what I love, because I think a lot of people will say, oh, I can't just do what I love because, you know, because the paradigm says you can't do that. But I always gave myself that gift of, you know, pursuing what I did love. I did work as a writer for a few places before I struck out on my own. But I've been on my own for a really long time, you know, working for myself, freelancing for publications, and then working out of my home. So I've allowed myself that freedom to believe that that could happen and that I could do that, because it is a freedom, and a lot of people will not accept that freedom. So I'm grateful that I, you know, had the balls, so to speak, to do that.
And how long does it take you to, I mean, to me, the work that goes into writing a book, I mean, does it take you a long time? I mean, I'm always amazed when some people say, like writing a song, they've written a song in minutes and it's a beautiful song. So how long does it take you to write a book?
I suppose it varies, but one of the things, in fact, I've got a new book that comes out in August, and it's called Art and Soul Reloaded. And it's a book about tapping into your, you know, summoning the muses and tapping your creative side. Because I really believe, in fact, you asked me earlier, you know, how did I go from travel writing, or George Clooney slept here, into law of attraction? And I think I consider law of attraction more like connecting to this bigger thing, you know, God, or field of infinite potentiality, the universe. I mean, it doesn't matter what you call it. But when you're a writer and when you love to write, you know that when you're writing good stuff, that you're tapping into something beyond yourself. Because, you know, I'm limited to what my little pea brain knows, which, you know, is limited. But the muses, as I like to call them in this new book, you know, again, there's so many names for this, but you know that you are connected to this other thing. And so through writing, you learn that. And I don't remember exactly how you worded the question, but it also, I think that's one of the other reasons why I got into writing about this topic, because I came to know this bigger thing partly through my connection to writing. Oh, and then you ask how long. So I think, you know, the best thing is when I feel like I'm channeling something beside me, because, but the thing is, you do have to kind of show up every day and prove to those muses that you're serious. You know, you can't just, you don't just, the muses doesn't say, hey, I have a book, or they may always be saying that to all of us, or I've got a project I'd like you to take on, or I've got this, you know, invention I'd like you to present to the world, or whatever. But we have to be willing to be there every day and listen to what the muses are going to tell us, what the creative gods have to offer us. or have to offer the world. I mean, we're just the channels. We're just the secretary, basically writing it down. And I feel like that is the true role of any creator or any writer, and really any person, you know, is to listen to their role, their job, their gift that they're meant to give to the rest of the world.
You remind me of Neil Donald Walsh when you say about channeling, and because I think you mentioned him in one of your books.
Yeah,
I have read Conversations with Book Gods, and it's me not being a kind of, I'm not a religious person, but that really opened my eyes to something, you know, there being something. But and you do say in your book, I think it's E squared. Is it E squared you mentioned? But you call it all different names. And I love the fact that you call it different names. So as not to offend anybody, but just to be open to all the different names that people give it.
Exactly. What I like to say is, which synonym you use to call it doesn't matter. What matters is that you call it forth. So call it whatever you like. Call it, my friend Colette Baron-Reed calls it Quantum Fred. You can call it anything, but the important thing is that you appreciate its existence and you tap in. I mean, you can't not be connected to it, but you can erect a wall to where you're not aware of it in your life. And I think a lot of people do that. They don't realize, how connected they are to this force that, is constantly, recreating itself through us.
Yes, yes. I have to say your books have opened me up a lot. And I find it quite incredible, as you say, we talk about the drawing ping and things, and I find it quite amazing how you can just doubt something, and next thing you know, you lose it. If it's something you're expecting something, and you think, oh, I don't know. Like for me, like I've just recently been traveling, and I had the chance for a house sit, and I wasn't sure I wanted it, and the next thing I know, it's gone, and it's simple as that. Isn't it incredible?
No, wait, say that again. What exactly happened where it's gone? What's gone?
I had a house sit organized, kind of in the process. Do you know what house sit is?
That yes. You were house sitting for someone.
I was going to house sit for someone.
Okay.
And I wasn't sure I wanted it. And then the next thing I know, she'd found someone else. And that's a typical thing of, well, if you tell the universe you're not sure, then, it's taken away.
Right, exactly. Yeah, one of the things I say, people say, oh, I really want to travel. I'd love to go to Mexico. Well, no, maybe I'd rather go to Jamaica. Well, no, maybe I'd rather go to South America. It's like it's a pinball machine going back and forth. The universe says, yes. Oh, here. It's just going back and forth, and we need, because we change our mind all the time. We're not really definite and crystal clear in what we're going for.
So that's an interesting topic you bring up, because I saw somebody post the other day on Facebook a very generic request, and I said you have to be specific, and they came back and said, well, I don't want to be too specific. I want the universe to show me. So what would you say to somebody for that sort of situation?
I do agree with that. And in fact, one of the things that I have often said, that I have 4 main goals, and they are generic. In that I trust that the universe knows what's best for me better than what I think's best for me. And once you get to where you trust and know that you're loved by this force, then it's pretty easy to turn that over and let the force handle the details and to handle the gifts that it gives. But my 4 intentions are really peace of mind, surety of purpose, clear, unmistakable guidance, and unceasing joy. So that isn't anything specific. It's like, okay, universe, what can you give me? What would be the thing that would bring those intentions into my life? Not saying this is how you do it. Like a lot of people say, oh, I want to win the lottery. Well, that's like tying the universe's hand behind it back, because it's saying, okay, I want abundance, so to speak, or I want money. But this is the one way I will allow it to come in, when the universe is so abundant, has all kinds of other ways to supply your needs. So, that's really kind of a fool's errand in the sense that so I guess I would agree more with the person that said it doesn't have to be. So I know that's sort of just the opposite of what I said. You have to be crystal clear. But in some of those specific things, but I think it's good to go general in what you really want, and then trust that the universe will know the details and how to work out the details, or even what the best details might be for, what you're wanting.
And as they say, this or something better.
Exactly. I've heard that too. Yeah. Yeah.
Yes, yes. And what's the biggest thing, the kind of, that you've got? What's the kind of been the thing that's blown you? I mean, other than for me, that drawing pin is pretty big, but what's the kind of thing that's blown you away most? Either, well, for yourself, firstly.
That's happened to me?
Yes.
Wow, that's quite a question. I've had so many things over the years. And you know what's really interesting too? You were talking about how if you don't get it down, or you're a little iffy, then it'll pass right on through. And one of the things, and one of the main purposes for me with Think and Grow Rich, is that we need to stop and really register all these amazing things that happen. Because what happens is we'll have all kinds of manifestations, we'll have all kinds of great gifts, and then we've totally forgotten them within a week. Whereas if something negative happens to you, it's just how our brains work. We were wired for that old fight or flight thing, and so our neural pathways just cement in and they register negative things. That's just how we've evolved. I think we need to switch to where we're now. So it's really important that when something great happens to you, that you don't just say thank you and forget it, that you literally kind of sit and revel in it and literally make it register, make it go into that neural pathway in your brain. And I guess I say that because right at the moment, I'm not thinking of anything. I mean, it's just like, it seems like just a way of life. Things are always happening. Well, I told this story in E Squared about, wanting to go to, or having a crush on the guy that was going to Australia, and thinking, oh, I want to go find this guy. This is back when I was, using more specific goals and things that I wanted. And, had no idea how that was going to happen. But, very soon my editor at the magazine Modern Bride, which is no longer in existence anymore, but she called and said, hey, we need a story about Australia. Would you be willing to go? So, that's a pretty amazing thing. I don't know, just so many stories. And one of the things I do talk about in eCubed, the thing that's been really great for me is getting to hear all the stories from everybody else, because I get all these emails from people that start with some variety of, you are never going to believe this. So I get to hear these stories day after day, and it really has been rewarding and a lot of fun. And, I get to celebrate with people right here, so I get to hear a lot of stories. So, I don't know, I guess being a travel writer, I mean, how remarkable is that? I mean, I live in the middle part of the country. My father was a Methodist minister. There were no silver spoons in my background whatsoever. And so the fact that I wanted to travel the world, how was that going to happen? How could that happen to a kid in Kansas who grew up in a town of, was a town of 600 people? How am I going to travel the world? Well, I was smart enough to know that I didn't know how to figure that out, but I knew that that's what I wanted to do, so I let the universe work it out, and that's kind of how I fell into travel writing. In fact, the first time, I don't think I even knew there was a field of travel writing per se. I had sent a query letter off to Ladies Home Journal, and I'd mentioned, that I'd been to Nicaragua picking coffee, that I'd been to Jamaica, staying in a villa, and so she calls me up. This is back in the day when we still used telephones, and she said, do you do travel writing? And with Ladies Home Journal, I'd sent it off to Ladies Home Journal, which is a women's magazine here in the US. And I said, oh yes, even though I wasn't exactly sure what it was. So I guess I knew what travel writing was. I said, oh yes, I do. You never say to an editor, oh no, I don't do that. You always, yes, I'm happy to write about that. She says, well, where are you going next? And of course, I wasn't going anywhere. But a friend of mine was going to Tampa, Florida. So I said, I'm going to Tampa. And she said, okay, I'd like, this many words, here's your deadline. So I hung up and I called my friend, hey, can I go to Tampa with you? And I, went to Tampa, wrote the story, and so kind of fell into travel writing. So that was a pretty remarkable way how I've, been able to go all over the world on a pretty minuscule budget, on sort of a micro budget, by being a travel writer. So that's a pretty amazing thing. When you talk about amazing stories, but just, I don't know. I mean, to me, just amazing story that, you might be $5 short on something, and then you look down and there's a $5 bill on the ground. I mean, the stories go on and on and on. There's so many amazing stories. I think the world is just generally amazing all the time. And I think our job is to really notice that and to take away those filters that insist that life sucks and then you die, which is kind of the thing that a lot of people believe.
Absolutely, absolutely. So what's the, I mean, you might have read about it, you might have written about it in one of your books, but what's the most amazing story you've heard from somebody else?
Well, a lot of people seem to like the money stories. So I had a woman tell me that, during the time she was doing the I don't know, I think it was the first experiment, she got $100,000 out of the blue. I mean, $100,000 out of the blue, that's pretty amazing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Another woman was given a car by a priest that she hadn't even seen or talked to for 10 years. I mean, out of the blue. So I don't know. Those are all some pretty amazing stories. I don't know. I'd have to think about it. But just like, here's a story about a woman who, when she was doing the one where you want to hear from someone.
Oh, yes.
You want to hear. And so she decided that the person she wanted to hear from was her great aunt Edna, who had died, but she was doing a genealogy, and she hadn't been able to track that part of the family tree, and she had been trying and trying and trying. So she decided that was who she wanted to have contact from. And this is after months of trying to track down Aunt Edna. And I may not have that name right, but I think it was Aunt Edna, but it was her aunt.
Yeah.
Well, during the time that she was doing that experiment, this little ding email pops into her inbox, and turns out that Aunt Edna, she had had one letter spelled wrong. I mean, this was someone who, and I said in there, if it's someone that you've shaken hands with, then you're going to be more apt to be able to transfer that message. And she said she had her old ring, it had been passed down to her. So in her mind, that meant that she had shaken hands with Aunt Edna. So during the time, this ding happens, and she got a little email from the state of California, and they had suddenly found Aunt Edna. So she was able to track down all kinds of information from Aunt Edna. So was that Aunt Edna getting through to her? I mean, who knows? But, well, I mean, that's what I like to believe. I like to believe, I mean, the kookier the stories, the better. I mean, some people will call it kooky. To me, that's not kooky. But to some people, they would say, oh, yeah, right. But I love those, oh, yeah, right stories. Those are my favorite kind.
Yes, yes, yes. I love the story you shared, actually. I think it's the beginning of E Squared. You liken the heater, about how you fell asleep, and you say that you're right next to something, and yet you're oblivious to it.
Exactly. Yeah, that was a pretty cool story, because it was night when I went in there. We were just in there, goofing off, and couldn't see anything, just kind of hanging out, and then fell asleep. And then the next day, here we are shivering, trying to stay warm, and the next day wake up by the dawn's early light. There's a space heater we could have turned on the entire time, but we didn't know. We didn't, and I do think that's a really good representation of life. There's so much more than we are willing to admit or willing to use and embrace in our lives.
Absolutely, yes. I'm curious, you still live in Kansas?
I do.
Why is that? Because, I mean, not that nothing wrong with Kansas, but
thanks a lot. No.
No, I mean, but you could be, I mean, because obviously very successful, you could live anywhere. So what draws you, I mean, have you got family? What draws you to Kansas to still base yourself there?
Well, I live in a really cool little university town that I like a lot. It's where I raised my daughter. And I travel a lot too. So it's a nice place to come back to in the heart of the country. It's easy to, get airports to anywhere in the country. Now, when I travel overseas, it does add an extra, leg to wherever I'm going. But, I don't know, I suppose I just like kind of the quietness here, and it is really interesting. It's a small enough town, so there's an easy pace here, and there's a lot of artists here, and so I can walk to a lot of things. So I have access to pretty much everything, and it's an interesting town. I don't know if you're familiar with William Burroughs. He lived here the last 40 years of his life. There's a lot of people that have been here. It's a good town. It's a really unusual town. People, don't know about Lawrence, Kansas. So a lot of people do, but a lot of people don't do. But it's a great town. So.
Oh, that's a good enough reason to stay.
Yeah.
Do you find you get spotted? Do you get noticed when you go out, go places, Pam? Do people know who you are? Or do you manage to kind of go under the radar?
Oh, well, it's funny. I was Yeah, I mean, I'm totally under the radar. I don't feel like any kind of celebrity whatsoever. But sometimes, I guess, because of the recordings on, you know, the audio books or whatever, like I was at the Omega Institute, which is a kind of a self-help yoga place in upstate New York. It's been around forever. Ram Dass used to be there a lot. Just very famous. A lot of New Yorkers go up there. And I was giving a workshop, and you know, of course, the 30 or 40 people in my workshop knew me and were seeing me, and, you know, but I was walking up to the chapel one night. They were doing a concert or they were doing something up there. And I was, you know, talking to someone, and some guy was ahead of me, and he goes, he turned around and he said, "You're Pam Grout." I mean, he wasn't in my workshop. He could recognize my voice, you know, from having heard me, I guess, on interviews or hearing my audiobooks or whatever. So I think some people would recognize my voice. My voice right now is sounding kind of hoarse to me. Do you think it sounds different than it does normally on the books that you listen to?
Yes, you are. You can tell you've got a bit of a.
Okay, I didn't know, because I you know, had this thing for a week or so, and I'm thinking, well, my voice is sounding a little bit better, but anyway, so but no, like that sometimes, but not. I mean, I can walk down the street; it's not a big deal. And you know, in my own hometown, I'm nobody. I'm just, you know, myself. So, and I don't really consider myself a celebrity in any way, not in any way.
Oh, you obviously remain humble, but you're amazing. And before we go, please share that amazing story about your daughter, if you don't mind, if you're happy to share that, because I just think that's quite incredible.
Oh, the story about Taz? Yeah, it's pretty funny. Okay, so she just did a solo hike literally a couple weeks ago around the Abel Tasman National Park in New Zealand. And you access the trailhead there in Nelson. As you know all this, but I don't know if people in Wales or wherever your listeners are would know this story. But she was staying in Christchurch and had caught a ride up to Nelson with this semi driver that her dad knew. And her dad had a friend of her dad lives there in Nelson, and she had said, "Hey, you can stay here at my house, and then I'll take you to the trail on Sunday," that she was going to start her trail. So she was going to get there because it was about a 9-hour drive or something. It was a long drive. So she was going to get there at 3 in the morning. And the woman, her name was Marion, and she said, "You know what? I will just leave the back door open. I'll be asleep. Just go on in. Just go right on in and make yourself comfortable." So Taz gets there at 3 in the morning, you know, goes in, the back door's open, walks in, you know, finds a bed and falls asleep. The next morning, you know, the door flings open in the bedroom that she was sleeping in, and this woman says, "Who are you?" And Taz said, "I'm Marion's friend." And she said, "Who's Marion?" Turns out she had gone into the wrong house and had, you know, slept in the wrong bed. And so the woman, once she explained it to her, she was very nice, and she, you know, gladly took Taz over to the correct house. But anyway, it was kind of funny. I mean, can you imagine waking up and there's some young girl in your bed with this big giant backpack? Because I mean, she had her tent and her sleeping bag and all the stuff she was going to need for her 5-day solo hike through the Abel Tasman National Park. So it was pretty funny, and luckily it all ended well. But I love the fact that, you know, all the doors were open and she just walked in. And one of the funny things that happened too, the little girl whose bed she ended up sleeping in, her name was Tasman as well. And she happened to be sleeping over her father's that night. Otherwise, she'd have been in the same bed. And then Tasman would have known. But anyway, it was pretty funny. And it worked out great. Yeah. It provided a great story for us.
Yes, yes. Well, thank you so much, Pam. This has been an absolutely wonderful interview, and thank you so much for your time. Now, where can people find you if they want to find you? I mean, obviously your books and things, but is there somewhere else they can find you too?
Yeah, I've got a blog and a website, and if you know my name, you can find me on Twitter, Facebook, whatever. But if you just go to pamgrout.com, there's a little place where you can sign up for my blog, and it depends. Sometimes I update it. For a while, I was updating it daily, but I put out free little stories, little missives, whatever. I often do, you know, tell some of the results of the experiments on there. So they can find me at pamgrout.com or Twitter, Pam Grout. So anyway, if they know my name, they can find me.
Yes, yes. And I get your emails because I'm a subscriber, and I share them on Facebook because they're amazing. Some of that I just find them absolutely amazing. So so thank you again, Pam. I hope you all got great value out of this interview. I found it absolutely incredible. I could talk to you for hours, Pam, because you're just like your books. You're so easy to listen to, and your stories are so entertaining. So you can contact Pam, like she's told you. And if you want to find out more about me and Law of Attraction, then click the link below and come and find out more about me. And I'll be back next week with another amazing guest. And thank you so much, Pam. I cannot tell you how wonderful it's been.
Thank you.
I love your work. And thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Goodbye, everybody.
Bye-bye.